Part 1. The Reagan Shooting. The Hinckley shooting gets talked about a lot, but what doesn't get talked about is how close the entire thing came to going completely sideways. Not just for Reagan, but for the agents themselves. In those first 1.7 seconds, Agent Jerry Parr makes a judgment call that saves Reagan's life. His instinct is to push Reagan into the car and head to the White House. That's protocol. Get the president to a secure location. But 2 minutes into the drive, Reagan coughs up bright red blood into his hand and tells Parr, "I think you broke my rib." Parr looks at the blood, frothy, oxygenated, and immediately redirects to George Washington University Hospital instead. That decision, made in about 4 seconds based on one look at blood consistency, is the reason Ronald Reagan survives. If they'd gone to the White House, he would have been 20 minutes from a surgical team with a bullet collapsing his lung. Here's what makes the Hinckley shooting so alarming from a security standpoint. Hinckley was standing in the press area. He had cleared exactly the same security cordon that every legitimate journalist standing next to him had cleared, because in 1981, the press area adjacent to a presidential exit required no advanced security screening. None. Photographers, reporters, and a man who had been obsessively stalking Jimmy Carter and then Reagan for months were all standing in the same space, separated from the president by about 15 feet and a rope. After the shooting, the Secret Service overhauled its entire approach to crowd segmentation and the treatment of the press area as a controlled zone. Those changes are standard procedure now. But on March 30th, they weren't. And that gap in protocol nearly ended the Reagan presidency and killed 3 other people before it was closed. Reagan survived, cracked a joke to his surgeons about hoping they were all Republicans, and was back in the White House within 2 weeks. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity and committed to a psychiatric facility. He was unconditionally released in 2022. Part 2. The Ford Assassination Attempts. If the Reagan shooting is the most famous near-miss in Secret Service history, the Gerald Ford attempts are the most statistically improbable. In September 1975, in a span of 17 days, 2 separate and completely unconnected people tried to shoot Gerald Ford in California. 2 different women. 2 different cities. Both attempts failed for almost absurdly different reasons. September 5, 1975. Sacramento, California. A 26-year-old Manson family associate named Lynette "Squeaky" Fromm positions herself in a crowd outside the California State Capitol building and pulls a .45 caliber pistol from inside her red robe. She chambers the weapon, points it at Ford from 2 feet away, and pulls the trigger. The gun doesn't fire. Secret Service agent Larry Buendorf grabs the weapon and pins Fromm to the ground in under a second. The reason the gun didn't fire: Fromm had loaded 4 rounds into the magazine, but never chambered one into the firing mechanism. She'd owned the weapon for weeks, and apparently never test-fired it or understood how it worked. She later told investigators she hadn't intended to actually shoot Ford. She wanted the arrest to draw attention to Charles Manson's case. She got the arrest. Nobody was impressed. 17 days later, September 22nd, San Francisco. A 45-year-old political activist named Sarah Jane Moore is standing across the street from the St. Francis Hotel as Ford exits through the front doors. She fires a .38 caliber revolver directly at Ford from roughly 40 feet. The shot misses by inches, not because the Secret Service got there in time, but because a bystander named Oliver Sipple, a former Marine, grabbed Moore's arm at the precise moment she pulled the trigger and deflected the shot into a wall. A second shot she fired went wide. Ford was pushed into his limousine and driven away. The Secret Service hadn't spotted Moore in the crowd. What they had done was confiscate a different gun from Moore the day before, after receiving a tip that she might be a threat. She'd bought a replacement weapon that morning. 2 attempts in 17 days on the same president. One stopped by a mechanical error. One stopped by a bystander. The Secret Service in both cases was either 1 second ahead or 1 second behind. That's the margin they operate in, every single day. What's also worth noting about the Ford attempts: Gerald Ford was never elected president. He was appointed vice president after Spiro Agnew resigned, then assumed the presidency after Nixon's resignation, meaning he had never run a national campaign, never built a full-scale protective detail from scratch, and inherited a security infrastructure still reeling from the Kennedy assassination just 12 years earlier. 2 people tried to kill him within his first 14 months in office. Both failed. Ford died of natural causes in 2006 at 93 years old, the longest-lived president in American history. Sometimes luck is part of the security protocol too. Part 3. The White House Fence Jumper. September 19, 2014. It's 7:19 p.m. on a Friday. President Obama has just left the White House via helicopter, heading to Camp David for the weekend. The building is as close to empty of senior personnel as it gets. The front lawn is lit, the fence line is monitored, and a 42-year-old Army veteran named Omar Gonzalez scales the north fence of the White House, drops down onto the lawn, and sprints for the front door. He makes it 70 yards. The Secret Service has a protocol for this. The protocol involves a trained guard dog, physical agents on the lawn, and a locked front door. That night, the dog was not deployed. The agents on the grounds failed to tackle Gonzalez before he reached the north portico, and the front door, the main entrance to the White House, was unlocked. Gonzalez runs through the unlocked front door, past the entrance foyer, past the stairway to the first family's private quarters, and makes it all the way to the East Room before an off-duty Secret Service agent returning from a shift physically tackles him and pins him to the floor. In his pocket, a folding knife with a 3.5-inch blade. The congressional investigation that followed found a cascade of individual failures that night. The alarm box near the front door had been intentionally silenced by staff who found the frequent false alarms annoying. The officers stationed just inside the front door initially froze. Communications between the exterior lawn team and the interior team lagged. None of these failures were catastrophic on their own. But stacked together, a man with a knife got through the front door of the White House and ran past the staircase to the president's living quarters before anyone stopped him. Obama wasn't in the building. His family was. Sasha and Malia had departed minutes before Gonzalez hit the fence. The Secret Service Director Julia Pearson resigned 12 days after the incident. The White House fence has since been replaced with a taller, anti-climb barrier, and the front door is locked now. Part 4. Kennedy's Dallas. November 22, 1963. Dealey Plaza, Dallas, Texas. This is the one that defines everything. The assassination of John F. Kennedy is also the most comprehensive documented failure of presidential security in American history. And what makes it so devastating, even 60 years later, is how many individual things had to go wrong simultaneously for it to happen. Start with the motorcade route. The route through Dealey Plaza was published in Dallas newspapers 2 days before the visit, including the specific turn onto Elm Street that would slow the presidential limousine to approximately 11 miles per hour directly below the Texas School Book Depository. Publishing the route was standard practice in 1963. It is no longer standard practice. Then, there's the follow-up car. The Secret Service protocol was for agents to ride on the running boards of the car directly behind the president, effectively surrounding the vehicle with bodies and eyes at all times during a slow-moving motorcade. On November 22nd, the follow-up team was riding inside the car, not on the running boards, partly at the president's own request. Kennedy reportedly didn't like the agent standing on the rear bumper of his car because it interfered with the crowd's view of him. And then there's Lee Harvey Oswald. He was employed at the Texas School Book Depository, a building directly on the approved motorcade route, and had a documented history including a defection to the Soviet Union and a prior arrest for distributing pro-Castro literature. He was not on any Secret Service threat list. He was not subject to additional scrutiny. He went to work that morning, carried a package he described to a coworker as curtain rods, and took up a position on the 6th floor. At 12:30 p.m., the motorcade turned onto Elm Street directly below him. 3 shots. The first likely missed or caused a minor wound. The second, the so-called magic bullet, passed through Kennedy's neck and wounded Governor John Connally in the same car. The third struck Kennedy in the head. Agent Clint Hill, riding on the follow-up car, sprints toward the limousine the moment the first shot fires and reaches the trunk of Kennedy's car within seconds, in time to push Jackie Kennedy back into the seat, but not in time to change what had already happened. The limousine accelerates toward Parkland Memorial Hospital at 80 miles an hour. Kennedy is declared dead at 1 p.m. The Warren Commission identified 18 separate breakdowns in security protocol that day. The Presidential Protection Act was overhauled. The Secret Service received a permanent, substantial budget increase. Motorcade routes in cities are now never published in advance. But none of that brought John Kennedy back. Part 5. The Columbia Scandal. Sometimes the scariest moment isn't a bullet. Sometimes it's the realization that the people protecting the president can't be fully trusted. April 2012. Cartagena, Colombia. President Obama is preparing to attend the Summit of the Americas. 12 Secret Service agents arrive in the country 24 hours early as part of the advanced security team, the same team responsible for surveying the president's hotel, establishing security perimeters, and coordinating with local police. Standard advance work. Except that night, multiple agents brought local women, later identified as sex workers, Back to their hotel rooms at the Hotel Caribe. The incident came to light because one agent refused to pay a woman he'd brought to his room, and she complained loudly enough to involve local police. Hotel staff notified supervisors. Within hours, the entire incident was unraveling in front of Colombian law enforcement and American diplomatic staff. The immediate security concern was this. The agents had access to the president's schedule, his motorcade routes, the layout of his accommodations, and the security protocols for the entire visit. Any woman brought into one of those rooms had access to whatever was lying around: phones, documents, badges. The full extent of what may or may not have been seen or shared was never definitively established, because most of the agents involved were gone before anyone could fully investigate. 11 agents were ultimately implicated. Some resigned. Some were forced out. Director Mark Sullivan faced intense congressional scrutiny. A subsequent investigation found that this kind of conduct had occurred on previous presidential trips and simply hadn't been caught. Here's what makes this terrifying in a way that a gunman on a rooftop isn't. A sniper can be spotted. A fence jumper can be stopped. The threat from inside the security apparatus itself, from people who are supposed to be the last line of defense, is almost impossible to defend against. Obama was never in direct physical danger that day in Cartagena, but the machine built to protect him had a crack in it, and nobody had noticed until a dispute over money at 2 a.m. in a hotel hallway blew the whole thing open. Part 6. The Trump Pennsylvania Rally, July 13, 2024. Butler, Pennsylvania. This is the most recent entry on this list, and it's the one that broke a 43-year streak. The last time a sitting or former president was struck by a bullet was the Reagan shooting in 1981. 20-year-old Thomas Matthew Crooks positions himself on the roof of a building approximately 130 meters from the stage where former President Donald Trump is addressing a campaign rally. The building is outside the Secret Service's inner perimeter but clearly visible from multiple vantage points. Local law enforcement had been alerted to Crooks acting suspiciously in the area, at least an hour before the shooting. Officers attempted to locate him on the roof. He fired before they reached him. Trump was struck by a bullet, or bullet fragment, that grazed his right ear. He dropped behind the podium. When he stood back up seconds later, his fist raised, blood on his face, it produced one of the most photographed images in American political history. One rally-goer behind the stage was killed. 2 others were critically wounded. Crooks was shot dead by a Secret Service counter-sniper within seconds of his first shot. The congressional investigation that followed revealed a now familiar pattern: multiple communication failures between local law enforcement and the Secret Service detail, a security perimeter that didn't account for elevated positions outside its boundary, and a suspicious individual who had been flagged and lost. The Secret Service Director, Kimberly Cheadle, resigned 10 days after the shooting. The margin between grazed his ear and struck in the head is a few centimeters. A slightly different angle, a slightly different moment. In the history of presidential security, it always comes down to the same thing: seconds and inches. Part 7. The shot that almost rewrote history. Most people know about the Kennedy assassination. Most people know about Reagan. Far fewer people know about the night in February 1933 when a gunman fired 5 shots at a president-elect from point-blank range, hit 5 bystanders, and missed his actual target completely, because a woman standing in the crowd grabbed his arm. February 15, 1933. Bayfront Park, Miami, Florida. Franklin Delano Roosevelt has just been elected president but hasn't yet been inaugurated. That happens in March. He's sitting in an open car after giving a brief speech, relaxed, no bulletproof glass, no armored vehicle, a crowd pressing in from all sides in the warm Florida night air. A 33-year-old bricklayer named Giuseppe Zangara climbs onto a wobbly folding chair about 25 feet from Roosevelt's car and opens fire with a .32 caliber pistol. He fires 5 shots. Every single one misses Roosevelt. Here's why. Lillian Cross, a woman standing near Zangara in the crowd, sees him raise the gun and shoves his arm upward as he pulls the trigger. The shots go wide. Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak, who is standing next to Roosevelt's car shaking the president-elect's hand, takes a bullet in the chest. 4 other bystanders are also hit. Roosevelt remains completely uninjured and, remarkably, stays at the scene, refusing to be driven away while Cermak and the other wounded are still on the ground. He reportedly holds Cermak in the back of his car on the drive to the hospital, telling him, "Tony, keep quiet. Don't move. It won't hurt if you keep quiet." Cermak dies 19 days later. Roosevelt is inaugurated on schedule. The reason this moment belongs on this list isn't just the near miss. It's what Roosevelt's presidency became. FDR served 4 terms. He guided America through the Great Depression and World War II. The entire trajectory of the 20th century runs through his decisions. And all of it nearly ended on a folding chair in Miami because a bricklayer's aim was bad and a woman in the crowd had fast hands. Zangara was arrested on the spot, tried within 2 weeks, and executed in the electric chair on March 20th, 33 days after the shooting. He went to the chair without apparent remorse, reportedly complaining that there were no photographers present to document his execution. Roosevelt, meanwhile, moved into the White House and got to work. The Secret Service in 1933 was a fraction of the size and capability it would eventually become. Fewer than 35 agents for the entire presidential detail, no standardized protocols for open-air events, no advanced threat assessment procedures worth describing. The modern Secret Service, as we understand it, is largely a product of what went wrong in the decades that followed.